especially the very established metrics, such as citations, author H index, impact factors, and so on. However, there is a certain group of people that are still debating how useful these metrics could be, since they're still just numerical values, right? There are a lot of limitations to it. Yeah, for example, with citations, it needs a lot of time for them to be accumulated for papers. So it has its limitations, but still they're being constantly developed, and the administrators and publishers and also the digital libraries are constantly supporting these metrics. A very valid example for these are the Altmetrics that are very recently introduced. And these are basically aspects that are covered beyond the academic side of the work. Like they just provide metrics that could accumulate in web interactions. And so these are basically some tools that are accumulating data from a variety of sources and providing values, for example, number of downloads, number of tweets, number of reads, bookmarks, for example. So these are basically those metrics that are now being accumulated and termed as Altmetrics. But since they're very new, especially in the computer science domain, they're constantly being investigated, and people are trying to understand whether these could be useful. And our research, our work here is also trying to investigate these metrics. And with that, we came up with the first research question, which was basically critically analyze how altmetrics relate with citations. So we look at each of these altmetric categories, and we try to understand what is the user behavior on the web. And our second research question is how these metrics are evolving over time. So we want to understand which of these metrics could in future be proxy or complement to citations, and maybe understand how their behavior is over time, evolving over time. The third and the last research question is we dive deep into the citation, the Twitter account, and how these could reflect on any future later citations. So to start with, just to give you an idea about altmetrics, what are the metrics that we're basically considering when we say altmetrics? So we are basically focusing on Plumex. Plumex has 4 categories and further some subcategories, but the main idea is that it gathers data for usage, mentions, captures, and social media accounts. So this is how they have divided the categories, and we are trying to look into all of these 4 categories and how they could associate with citations. So before I get into the study design, I would just give you an idea about the data set that we gathered. We tried to look into the top computer science venues, and we tried to consider all of the ACM root categories, and based on that, we collected data for about more than 18,000 papers that were published in very recent years from 2015 onwards to mid of 2021. That's when we gathered this data. And so we were able to have this data set that we were then, we used it then to retrieve the metrics from Scopus. So Scopus was a very evident choice for us, since Plumex is only integrated right now with Scopus and ScienceDirect, but yeah, we chose Scopus because it's a larger coverage. And what we did was, as a result of this step, is basically we're getting a CSV file with all of these papers and their corresponding metrics. So once this data is gathered, we are trying to understand, just to give you an idea how the data look like. Of course, since these altmetrics are a very newly introduced concept, so there are a lot of papers that are still missing this data, and especially for older papers. So they're still lacking these altmetrics, which is very evident from these results here. We can see that the captures were the most, they were the most available metrics, but compared to the social media and mentions, these were very low. So there was a lot of missing data, but still we could deduce some associations with citations based on this data. The next step was to calculate the Spearman's rank correlation coefficient. We used this because this was the most commonly used for such kind of data. And so we also performed a similar analysis. We saw that there are positive correlations, positive moderate correlations of each of the Plumx matrix with citations. The significance was the correlation was significant for all of these, and so we were able to deduce that captures have the strongest correlation with citations, and mentions being the weakest, but mentions in social media, both of them being the weakest. But this could also be because there was less data for that captures. Since we saw on the last slide, we gathered a lot of data for captures as well. There's the missing values are very much evident here as well. But this is how the results look like regarding the correlations. The second, we did a yearly analysis to see how these metrics have evolved over the years. So as you can see, so there were a lot of observations that could be made looking at this graph, but what we saw for citations and for social media accounts and tweets is that citations get their peak values in 2018. However, the matrix, the social media and the tweet matrix have increasing peaks after in the very recent years. However, the citation peaks keep on decreasing. This is because citations take time to appear, and there are a lot of chances that these peaks would increase with time. So they have a contrasting behavior. However, with captures and with usage, it was, with captures, of course, the peaks were quite high. And for usage, the pattern, the behavior was quite random and almost irrelevant for mentions. But the main idea was that we wanted to accumulate data, how it looked like for these metrics over the years. And we can see that the social media and tweets count specifically have gained a lot of popularity in the recent past 4 or 5 years. So this is what we wanted to analyze a bit more. And based on that, we looked further into tweets and how they could affect the scientific community, since we saw that they are evolving quite rapidly over the years. So we wanted to look deeply into it, and we saw that there is, of course, many advantages of using Twitter. The authors are trying to increase their visibility through tweeting about their papers. Of course, it provides a lot of chances for networking and so on. So there is a lot of popularity, and there is a lot of significance of these these social media platforms that are quite evident in the recent years for getting immediate response on a published paper, and which we could see further through our correlation analysis, that these also had a positive correlations similar to to the social media account. And still there were some exceptions, of course, as can be seen, that some papers had a lot of citations and a lot of tweets with citations to be appearing. But since the paper is recent, we can expect that this scenario would change. And but the idea is that we could observe a positive relationship between tweets and citations. And this was what we were trying to understand with both these metrics. So to conclude here, in this work, we tried to gather a large data set based on the computer science domain to understand associations between altmetrics and citation counts. We found a positive moderate correlationship, and we were able to observe this relationship more evidently for recent papers, and especially with social media platforms. Similarly, we could observe from the behavior pattern that the community is now very much involved in using social media platforms for increasing visibility and trying to obtain immediate feedback about their papers within the community. And this is also, of course, our observations are limited to just the data set that we gathered. Of course, this is just a first step towards getting into these conclusions, but of course, we are also trying to experiment more and analyze the data more extensively to understand and validate the potential of altmetrics. And we expect in future that these metrics could be more critically analyzed and assessed to understand the importance of papers. So with that, I would conclude my talk. Thanks a lot, and happy to answer.